This is our 100th daily episode. Pretty cool. So, on top of that, plus the regular episodes, we're at about 450 episodes total for the show, which is pretty crazy. So, anyways, I figured as a little change of pace, I want to try and start covering all of Marvel since I've covered all of the DC extended universe. I want to try and cover, at least in bits and pieces, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I figured I could start from the beginning, but I feel like people jump around so much with what they watch and all that. I figured it doesn't really matter, hopefully. So I figured I'd start with the Avengers films, all four. So this time we're going to do The Avengers from 2012, which is written and directed by Joss Whedon. Stars Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, Jeremy Renner, Mark Ruffalo, Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleston, Clark Gregg, Colby Smulders, Samuel L. Jackson, and many others. And the synopsis is Earth's mightiest heroes must come together and learn to fight as a team if they're going to stop the mischievous Loki and his alien army from enslaving humanity. So, I vividly remember going to see this when it came out. There was huge hype. This was the first time we had ever had all these different characters on screen together in this big movie, and they all had their, or at least for the most part, had their own standalone films. So there was massive anticipation for this, and Marvel was still in phase one, so still in the early stages of everything. And I've seen the movie probably maybe 6 times or so over the years, at least in its entirety. And when I first saw it, I loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, as many probably did. And I still enjoy it to a certain degree. I think it's very solid. Surprisingly, the action, especially the final act, is probably the best part, which I guess in some ways is the point, because that was the whole point of having these characters come together, is fight together. And so I think that part looks amazing. Like the effects, gorgeous still, even 10 plus years removed. And the whole cast works really well together, and they do throughout all of the MCU. It's very good casting across the board. Joss Whedon, I don't love him, and it's too bad that his career has kind of plummeted because of his behavior on set, amongst other things. And so it's a shame that he did these movies and basically just dropped off after that point. And even before that, I was never a huge fan. I was never a big Firefly fan or anything like that. But no matter what, he has a great writing voice, especially for comedy in these films. I think Avengers and Age of Ultron have some of the best comedy out of any of the MCU films, especially in the team-up films. He just has a good handle on energy, the style and delivery of humor as well in his direction. So I think the comedy and the writing overall is very, very solid in this and Ultron. I think, talking criticisms though, and maybe it's no huge shock, the production design and even costume design, pretty atrocious. Clearly, they put all of the money towards the effects, especially in the third act. And so, like, the production design, the costume design really kind of suffered. Like, it looks terrible. I think any interior scene, for the most part, that isn't CG looks pretty bad, in my opinion, and very low quality. But is what it is. You had your priorities, and clearly they did well in this movie. So that's a small issue, not a huge problem, but it's something I always notice really more and more when I watch it. The score is great, the iconic Avengers Marvel theme, I love that. And another big point that I think honestly some latter Marvel movies suffer from is Loki, to me, is, aside from the Winter Soldier, really one of the best villains and most interesting characters across the board in the MCU. And I think this movie especially really utilizes that very well and makes it more compelling for me, because I love villains. I love a good villain because that can also help make the hero's journey and challenges more interesting and compelling. So I think Tom Hiddleston's so underrated. He's great as Loki. I love the design of the character. All that stuff is good. Some other good moments, the Hulk smash scene with Loki where he smashes him back and forth, fantastic, love that. And also where Hulk becomes angry and starts smashing through the city. And then the iconic Avengers Assemble moment where the camera pans around all the characters, and that's still very iconic. So there are a lot of moments and a lot of sequences that still really hold up. Wouldn't be my favorite Avengers movie, would be somewhere in the middle, I think, ranking wise. and wouldn't be in my top 5 or top 10 favorite Marvel films, but it really did set the stage for what you could do with superhero films, the scale, the amount of characters, everything. It's very impressive in a lot of ways, and I will always have that nostalgic love of being blown away by this totally new thing in movies. So, yeah, that one is a heavy 4 out of 5. Let's get to the second Avengers film, which is Avengers Age of Ultron, which came out in 2015. Once again, written and directed by Joss Whedon, along with the cast from the last one, also Don Cheadle, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, Haley Atwell, Idris Elba, a few others. And the synopsis is when Tony Stark and Bruce Banner try to jumpstart a dormant peacekeeping program called Ultron, things go horribly wrong, and it's up to Earth's mightiest heroes to stop the villainous Ultron from enacting his terrible plan. So, like the first one, I vividly remember when this one came out. There's like the midnight screenings, I think, and it was a huge deal because it was the second Avengers movie, and Marvel was really, I'd say, in their prime at this point. And we weren't really in superhero fatigue or anything yet. We were like right in the sweet spot of superhero films blowing up and doing really well, and they were pretty much all consistently really good, at least in the MCU. And I've seen the movie a handful of times over the years, probably 4 or 5. And I think when I saw it for the first time, I thought it was better than the first. And maybe that just had to do with the hype or, seeing it with a huge crowd and all that. I don't know. But all these viewings removed and more time to think about it, I think it's by far the worst Avengers film. It's still watchable, but there are a lot of things that do not hold up. And it's honestly a bit of a slog to watch sometimes. Like, I think all the character stuff still really works. The sequences with Natasha and Bruce Banner, like taming Hulk, and the flashbacks with her character, the death of the Avengers dream with Iron Man. Like, there are a lot of good one-on-one sequences, or the woodcutting scene with Captain America, like all that stuff. Like, there's a lot of good dialogue-driven, emotional moments in the movie that do keep it afloat. But the biggest thing, as opposed to the first, whereas I think the first, like I said, the third act action sequence is the best part of the movie, I think it's the opposite for this. I think the best part is probably the Somalia, I think it's in Somalia, that warehouse attack with Ultron, that's great. But everything with the highway sequence and then the final Sokovia action piece is so long. It's so repetitive, it's bombastic, it's tiresome, and it feels like it just won't ever end. And so really, when it gets to that point in the movie, I'm just like checked out. And I want to give it more benefit of the doubt. And there are still a few moments here and there within those sequences that I enjoy, but it's the big picture that really brings it down. So that's by far the biggest problem with the movie that does not hold up. But putting aside like action sequences or scenes that I like, the best part of the movie by far, character-wise, is Ultron. That's easily one of the best Marvel villains, superhero villains that we've ever had, in my opinion. The writing is great. The performance is amazing. The look of the character is great. Like, it's a fantastic character that fully holds up. And so whenever that character is on screen, I'm engaged for a variety of reasons. But he's really not in it enough. I do like, though, the creation sequence where it's sort of partially made Ultron. I love that design. And then his recruitment of Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen, which that gets to another point. Performance-wise, most Marvel movies are pretty good, and I don't really blame either of those two actors for their performances in this, but they're by far the weakest links. And I think mainly it's the accent. It's just overdone. It's not consistent. And I'm glad that whether it was Elizabeth Olsen's choice or the studio's choice, I'm glad they pretty much lost it, or at least toned it down after this movie, because knowing who they are and how they actually talk, not to say that actors can't do accents, but they just sound so phony and it's goofy and just does not work. So not a big fan of those characters. And to be honest, I'm glad that they did kill Quicksilver off. Not anything against Aaron Taylor Johnson, but I don't see that character really working. I think he works a lot better in X-Men. Some other good moments, though, the party sequence at the beginning where they're trying to lift Thor's hammer, hilarious. And that goes into what I was saying in the first review, where Joss Whedon's comedy hits in both of these movies very consistently. So always really, really appreciate that. The Hydra snow mountain attack, I love that. It's probably one of the best sequences in the movie, action wise. And it looks great. I mean, visually, the whole movie looks very, very good. There aren't any real issues with effect quality, or even the production design is a lot better in this one than it was in the first. I like the updates on the characters, which that reminds me, I didn't bring it up in the first movie's review. Aside from the quality of the costume design itself, I'm so glad they updated the characters' designs, at least most of them, for this movie and so on and so forth, because characters like Thor in the first one just do not like the design. The costume, the hair, it just does not look very good in retrospect, but I'm really glad that they improved all of that for this movie. So that's a plus. I just really do find the pacing, the length, the structure of the movie to not really work much anymore. I can still pop it on, and get a few nice moments here and there with characters, or a few visually great moments, but not when I ever really feel the need to go back to, aside from doing a review like this or a marathon or something. So a bit of a shame, because I remember very fondly how much I loved this movie when I first saw it, and I had a really, really good opinion of it for quite some time, and then I revisited it a couple of years ago. I was like, oof, maybe not. So yeah. Anyways, that one is a light 3 out of 5. Let's get to the third Avengers film, which is Avengers Infinity War, which came out in 2018. It's directed by Anthony Russo and Joe Russo, who also did Captain America Winter Soldier and Civil War. Stars basically everyone in Hollywood. The Avengers cast: Chadwick Boseman, Zoe Saldana, Tom Hiddleston, Karen Gillan, Paul Bettany, Elizabeth Olsen, Anthony Mackie, Sebastian Stan, Idris Elba. List goes on and on and on and on. And the synopsis is: the Avengers and their allies must be willing to sacrifice all in an attempt to defeat the powerful Thanos before his blitz of devastation and ruin puts an end to the universe. So, this movie, I remember, as with all Avengers films, there was huge hype, especially since this was truly not just the Avengers coming together, but this was basically every single person in the MCU being involved in this movie, really, along with Endgame, one of the biggest, most epic movies of all time, considering all involved. And we did review it, I think, when it first came out, so you can check out that original review. And I think when I saw it, I have seen it probably 3 or 4 times at least since it came out. And when I first saw it, I was not a huge fan. I liked it all right, but I found it to be way too much of a setup for the second part. I thought it was just plot pieces moving around, setup for characters. There wasn't really much of a self-contained movie in there. And I understand that it's meant to be two pieces of the same story, but it still felt like, all right, I'd rather just watch one movie, or just it didn't really work for me totally. And I think as time has gone on, it's continued to go up, and I've thought about it more, and I've read more reviews of it, and now I don't think it's as good as Endgame, spoiler, but I do really like it, and I think my views have pretty much totally changed. I think, going back real quick, in terms of the scale, say what you will about these movies, and if you haven't seen like all of the other MCU movies, they probably won't really connect with you. But there's no denying the incredible, massive scale, and I don't know how they were able to manage getting these many characters in a movie that's really not that long. It's 2.5 hours, pretty much, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of characters, plot points moving, setups, things coming back from other films. Like, it's pretty insane the way that they're able to manage all of this, all the locations, all those threads, and have it make pretty much total sense in the big scheme of things. And it's not a big jumble. They managed to give basically everyone their moments, at least in one way or the other, like emotional moments or setting up characters and certain relationships. I think one of the best things is for any big fans is having characters from different parts of the universe suddenly thrust together, like Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy, or Captain America and Groot, or whoever else. I think all that is awesome, and I think every time I watch it, I enjoy that stuff more and more. So I think that the movie is definitely one of the better. It would be my second favorite Avengers film. One of the better films in terms of the team up movies. But talking about specific stuff that I like, I mean, there's so much to talk about. It's hard to really even grasp it fully. But Loki's death, I love that. The well, actually, talking about a small problem with the movie, one main thing that I always cannot get past is Mark Ruffalo or Hulk. They have like no purpose for him in this movie aside from basically just exposition. And I'm glad that they kind of corrected that in Endgame, but he is so throwaway in this. Like the scene that always gets me is towards the beginning where Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and Bruce Banner are talking together in that lobby place. It is the most ridiculous, nonsensical, stupid stuff like, oh, the super bots, the stones, we have to do this, the portals are gonna this and that. Like, and it's just basically Mark Ruffalo spitting off the most ridiculous stuff you can imagine. And I understand that they have to put in plot points and certain concepts and objects and all that in the movie at some point. But that scene is always just like, I'm like, oh God, I don't want to watch this. And then once we get past that, it's not that bad. But really, throughout the whole movie, Mark Ruffalo is pretty much just for exposition. And that is, I think they could have done something different with that because he has a lot to offer. And I'm glad that he did improve. Other things, the big fight in Wakanda is awesome. And I think that what I had issue with first time I saw it is I didn't get why we should care about all these characters fading away, in the blip. Because I was thinking, okay, in Endgame, we know based on like the trailers and all the leaks, we know most of these characters are going to return. So why should we care? I felt like it was really lazy. It didn't work. I was like, I'm not emotional about this when everybody else was around me. And I'm stupid maybe because of that. Sorry. That's just how I felt initially. But now, based on other things I read, the more I watch it, at least how I see it, and sorry if I'm late to the game, is it's really more about how the characters are reacting to those disappearances rather than the viewer. Like, okay, Captain America just lost blank. Iron Man just lost blank. How are they reacting? How are they thinking? Not how am I as a viewer considering, oh no, like this person just faded away. We lost the Guardians or whoever when we know they're coming back. Like that's not really the core point from what I gathered. So the ending does really work for me now. I think the one that I always go back to and I will submit, I think it really is good. The Spider-Man, Iron Man moment where he's like, what's going on? I don't feel right and I don't want to go, all that stuff. I think that's a really, really good moment acting wise for Tom Holland and for Downey Jr. I think that's a very touching moment. So I will submit that's a great scene. And the battle itself, it is sort of hard to keep that personal and intimate. Like it's such a big sequence where it's a lot of CG. And I guess the main point of it is to say, oh, there's Black Panther with Captain America and the Guardians all fighting together and et cetera, et cetera. I get it. I think that the action is probably the weakest part of the movie, though, because it does at times feel obligatory. The sequence with Captain America coming to get Vision and Wanda is good. The Gamora sacrifice with Thanos, very effective. And overall, I don't love Thanos. Sometimes he's such a big, sprawling, epic figure and so CG heavy that I don't always connect with that villain as much as maybe others, but I think Josh Brolin is very good. Performances across the board, great. CG amazing still, looks fantastic. The pacing is pretty decent. I think there are points where it does feel a little long, but I'm not really upset that it is long. I'm like, all right, I get it. It's getting every single thing together. So that works for me now as well. So it does, I guess you could call it a grower, not a shower for me. One that I will revisit every so often. I think there is just a nice sense of belonging in these movies where it's bringing together all these different parties and they're trying to work out their differences and seeing their friends and bringing their friends back and all that. So I don't know why it struck me now that I really wanted to revisit the Avengers films, but it was. So great movie. That is a 4.5 out of 5. Let's get to the fourth and final Avengers film as of now, which is Avengers Endgame. Came out in 2019. Once again, directed by Anthony and Joe Russo, stars essentially the same cast as Infinity War. The synopsis is: after the devastating events of Avengers Infinity War, the universe is in ruins. With the help of remaining allies, the Avengers assemble once more in order to reverse Thanos' actions and will restore balance to the universe. So, considering this was, as the title is, it is the end game, the final coming together moment. And after a decade of movies and stories, this was like the ultimate culminating event for basically all of moviegoers at the time. And even though I didn't love Infinity War, I was like, I have to see this movie as soon as it comes out. So I was there day one. And right off the bat, I've seen it 5, 6 times, I think at least now. And right off the bat, when I saw it, I loved it. I thought it was very much superior, and I still think it is superior to Infinity War. It is one that, while yes, you do carry everything, you need to have seen the majority of other things to have this movie make sense, which maybe some outsiders would call that a criticism of the movie. It is nevertheless, having just rewatched it in the last couple of days, still such a well balanced, emotionally gripping and touching, funny, well paced, good action, well written, well acted 3 hour blockbuster that is able to take 10 years of catalog stories and characters and have basically every single person get some sort of moment. And so I think it is still an amazing movie. It holds up fully for me. And I think I was a little worried since I hadn't watched it for a while if it was going to just be a slog or whatever else. I think even if I haven't gone back and watched the majority of the previous installments, which I hadn't, I think that this still stands on its own. If you know enough, you can just watch this on its own and really, really enjoy it. And you get to see all the characters you love, spend plenty of time in that world. So I think it is a fantastic, very impressive blockbuster, even now. Like, it's one of the best of recent years. Talking about, though, specific scenes, because there is so much. The opening sequence with Hawkeye, I think that's a great moment where suddenly his family's gone and then cuts to. So I think that's a great opening to the movie. The stuff with Iron Man being rescued by Captain Marvel is good, and that moment, which is a great Downey Jr. performance moment, is where he's saying to Cap, I lost the kid. And that whole tie-in from Infinity War with Spider-Man, like, very touching start, and how beaten down and lost Iron Man is, since he feels like he failed everyone and lost everyone. So it really does somehow, through direction, through writing, everything, that tone of getting very sincerely emotional, sad, drama, grief, loss, all that stuff. And then having scenes like the stuff with Thor in wherever that is, Iceland or wherever else, and he's super fat and looks like a melted ice cream cone, and all that stuff with Rocket and all that, like, very, very well balanced. And I still don't know how they managed to pull that off. But going back to the Thor stuff, that stuff is one of my favorite sequences in the movie where Thor is completely beaten down and become a drunk, and they have to try and recruit him back. And that's a very, very funny, uplifting moment in the movie. The stuff with Paul Rudd suddenly waking up and finding his family there is very touching. And then getting into the main crux of the movie, the going back in time to the different points in the MCU, like the Avengers New York sequence, all those others. I think that is so cleverly done. And it's something that you could call, in theory, like it could be lazy, it's just repetitive, etc., which so many movies have tried to do and failed. But this one, how they shoot it, whether it's, I don't know exactly how they did it, maybe that's a compliment, but how they shot it, where there are these new perspectives on the same scenes that we are familiar with, and getting new twists and turns and trying to change things and not trying to change it. Like, it really flows so well, and it's so much fun getting to revisit all of those things, that some things I had forgotten, some things I hadn't, but in full form and all together. So I think those chunks and how they cut back and forth, very well done. The sequence with Captain America fighting himself, love that. Bruce Banner, or I guess he's the Hulk in this, where he's basically just become a celebrity staying as the Hulk. I think that's awesome. And taking the selfie, I love that sequence at the diner. And then Captain America and Iron Man sort of putting the past behind him and teaming up. And the time travel stuff is really funny, where Paul Rudd comes back as different ages of himself. So it's the world building, the confidence, and the playfulness and ability to ground a lot of these feelings in a fairly understandable scenario, or not understandable, but relatable way, where people are dealing with grief and Captain America is doing this support group, and trying to find a way to move on and pretty much restart the world. So I honestly don't have any complaints really at all. I think the only thing that's a little, and I think people have made memes and stuff about it, the only thing that is a little maybe overdone, a little goofy is, and maybe I'm missing something. I've seen it enough now to where I feel like I'm not. Maybe I still am. Sorry. But the stuff with Hawkeye, where he's in Japan just killing people, trying to figure out what's happened and getting revenge, it seems a little random. And then he's like in Mexico, I think, and stuff. It just seems a little, what? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So if I'm missing something, let me know in any of the comment sections or social media. Sorry if I'm acting stupid there, but that's something that I'm always thinking, wait, why are you doing that? Why did you travel all the way here to kill these people for your family and all that? So if I had to point out anything, very small thing, but that's one little nitpick. But otherwise, it's still amazing. As I said, the final moments with Iron Man are great, and that's really where it all does come together. And the funeral, and you see basically every single person in Hollywood attending with all those characters. That's awesome. So it'll always be a favorite of mine. Maybe top 5 Marvel movies for me, but it's definitely up there no matter what. And I think I'll always, as many do, probably have that fondness for what it was able to accomplish and all those feelings I was able to evoke, and still be a great movie. It didn't just pander, in my opinion, at least. And as always, let me know your thoughts. I will be doing more Marvel franchises and series and stuff in the weeks, months to come. And if there are any that you want to see reviewed, specifically reviewed or talked about more, let me know in any way through the information in the show notes, the contact stuff. So let me know. Would love to hear from you. Yeah, that one is a heavy 5 out of 5.